we're delighted to have Shyanne Miller join us this evening. Some of you participated in our class last week when Hanif Salam spoke on behalf of Smart Justice Delaware and its priorities. And so this week, Shyanne will follow up with some additional information about police reform in Delaware, as I understand it, and I'll let Shyanne provide all of the specifics, but an initiative that has come out of Building People Power called Fair Policing Delaware. And I think without further ado, I'll turn it over to Shyanne. I might suggest that for everyone else for now, while Cheyenne's giving her presentation, that you might mute your computer. And I'll just say I met Shyanne years and years ago, actually probably not that
I was
many.
going to ask, was it like 5 years ago?
It
or
was
6?
probably 4 or 5. It was the Coalition to Dismantle the New Jim Crow, I think, was
Back in the days when we saw each other in person,
yeah,
y'all.
it was like we were real people. And then Shyanne and I also were in a small discussion group via the YWCA, a pilot program that was done on, I guess you'd sort of say, cross-racial dialogue.
Yeah,
It was wonderful.
and it's still going on too.
Yeah, we were the pilot, we were the guinea pigs, and it's continuing. And in the interim, Shyanne has had a baby and I have not. So I think I'll just mute myself as well and turn it over to Shyanne. Glad to see all of you here.
I appreciate seeing everyone too. I'm Shyanne Miller. Like Sue said, I've probably been under a lot of different organizations and still under most of those organizations. I'm a board member of the Coalition to Dismantle the New Jim Crow. I'm also a campaign manager for Building People Power campaign, which is an initiative of the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. And I'm a community organizer for Network Delaware. So I do a lot of work in the community around community organizing. Right now, in my official paid job, I'm officially a community organizer and I love it because I get to work on anti-racism across many different areas like criminal justice, health, housing, education. I mean, just about every area you can think of, economics. And so I'm here to talk a little bit specifically about police reform and the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. I know you probably heard a little bit about that last week. And so we're going to kind of dive into this from the space of what is it, a little bit of what is it, and how exactly does change happen? And what is this campaign, Delaware Campaign for Fair Policing? So I'd love to know who's in the room. I know we have a couple of people and I would love to see people, put in the chat if you can, your name, tell me where you're from. If you have a thing about why you care about policing, feel free to add that, because I know a lot of people have different reasons why they care about policing. But I'd love to see in the chat, just let me know who you are, where you're from. I'm Shyanne, I'm from Wilmington, just so everyone knows. I'm a Delawarean through and through. What is it, Wilmingtonian? I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I think Wilmingtonian is the official term. Yes.
I'm a Wilmingtonian. I live in Wilmington, born and raised in Wilmington. I probably live in almost every neighborhood in Wilmington, I feel like. Welcome, Jim. If you have not seen it, Jim, I think your op-ed is in the news, right? It's in there.
Yeah, it was out today.
That's what I want to hear. That's what I like it. Check it out if you haven't seen it. I believe it's Delaware Online. Is it Delaware Online?
It's on Delaware Online, yeah.
Check it out. Check it out. Get your friends to give you the account so you can get it past the paywall. That's the thing I always tell people. So we have Jim. Welcome, Jim. Let me see a few other names. Susan, hi.
Hi, I'm Bill Nace.
Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm from Westminster, the Peace and Justice Work Group, and I've seen you at the Smart Justice Coalition meetings, and thank you for coming with us this evening.
Thank you for being here. Norm and Judy, good to see you. I love it when we have people from across the state. That is beautiful. Hockessin. I got family out in Hockessin. Got family in Hockessin and Kennett. I don't know how it is. Kennett Square and Hockessin, like sister cities. I think I was calling them a city is really generous.
Very
Got
generous.
Newark is real generous. I used to always say, when I was in Kennett, I don't date nobody from Kennett because you never know. They might be your cousin. They might be your family. Don't play with that. Listen, that's crazy. Sally, good to see you.
Hi, Shyanne.
Bob.
Mike.
Hi, Mike.
I'm from Westminster as well, and I've been working on social justice issues along with Lynn and Sue for the last few years. So great to have you.
I love it. I love it. I love it. It's nice to see you too, Jane.
Thank you.
All right. I'm glad we have everybody here. I'm going to jump into this because I think you guys are really ready for this. LEOBOR, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. It's something that I'm going to refer to as LEOBOR. You'll probably see this written in a couple of different ways, depending on who you talk to. Sometimes it's LEOBR. I like to say LEOBOR because, you know, inclusion for the O. But basically, LEOBOR is the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. And essentially, this is a piece of law that already exists. So a lot of people always hear this and they're like, Bill. No, this is written in code right now. And so right now, this is the way that Delaware is carrying out its law, if you will. LEOBOR essentially says how you can investigate and discipline the police. And some of the things that LEOBOR does is makes it so that disciplinary records are secret from the public. It makes it so that police departments are essentially the authority when it comes to investigations and discipline. It also makes it so that police unions have precedence in saying how disciplinary procedures are kind of outlined. And it sets limitations on the time, place, and duration and questioning of an officer during an investigation. That one is a little weird because it talks about a little bit about the standard about what it means if someone is being investigated. So from my understanding of this, this is how someone explained it to me. If you did something bad and an officer caught you and you got arrested, you don't really get to choose where you get investigated, where you get questions, essentially, how long. You don't get to say, well, I have to go to work, you know, in a couple of hours. So can you get me tomorrow? Like, you don't get to say all that, but an officer has a difference. It's a difference, and they actually have a little bit of say in how they're questioned when an investigation is ongoing. And so, you know, that standard is a little different for if you do something bad, this is what you don't get. If they do something bad, this is what they do get. Oh, and feel free. I'm pretty okay with this being an open conversation. If you want to come off mute or you have a question, throw it in the chat. Because I want to answer questions as we go along. So more about LEOBOR. One of the reasons why we care about LEOBOR is because all these other great ideas about police transparency and accountability, these are all coming out. I don't know if you all saw today, a body-worn camera bill came out for the state. The city of Wilmington just made it so that Wilmington PD are also going to have body cameras. All these great things, right? But LEOBOR makes it so that if you did have body-worn cameras and you saw the camera footage of someone doing something bad, does that necessarily mean that you'll be able to have more information available to you about whether an officer has a record of not doing great things, like a bad discipline record? Not necessarily. It also doesn't mean anything in terms of accountability. So even if you get an officer on camera doing something that wasn't good, body-worn cameras, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that we can hold them accountable. Same thing with LEOBOR and data collection. We know, not LEOBOR and data collection, excuse me, data collection on arrest or data collection on what people call like profiling. Let's see what police are doing. Are they targeting Black and brown individuals? All these ideas about transparency and accountability are essentially held up because LEOBOR makes it so that you can't really hold police accountable even if you did have more transparency. Another one that comes up often is modifications to use of force, saying how we want to change use of force so officers aren't allowed to just do anything. I know you guys have heard of banning the chokehold, for example, as one of the most popular ones that we hear about use of force. If an officer does, if a law passes saying we're banning certain types of use of force, this isn't the way you can do it, you can only do it these ways, and some officer decides that they're going to break that rule, there isn't anything you can do to hold them accountable. It all comes back down to whether a police officer is going to be held accountable by police. The community has no say. And then, of course, just general community policing tactics, which the Wilmington Police Department is an example of a place that tries to use community policing tactics. And members of the community that I've spoken with all say it doesn't really work, and they don't trust the police, even though they've implemented community policing over the last, 3, 4, 5 years. And so Leobor is really one of the things that stands in the way of making these very important reforms effective. And so what we want to see is let's just focus on changing Leobor. What can we do to change Leobor to make it so that some of those reforms are more effective and so that the community feels more comfortable and trustworthy of police? And one, just change Leobor so that we can have discipline records available to the public. Very simple. And then, of course, change Leobor so that police aren't the only ones who can oversee police, which is how Leobor is now. If we were able to have more investigatory power and more discipline power in the hands of the community, maybe the community would feel better about knowing that police will be held accountable when wrongdoing happens. So the important thing that you need to know about Leobor is a state law. The Attorney General can talk good game about Leobor, but she can't do anything about it. Leobor has to be changed by the Delaware General Assembly, our state legislators. And that's important because it means that, when Leobor gets mentioned in the AG's plan, or if Leobor were to be mentioned by a governor that's coming up or anything like that, they can talk about it, but it's ultimately our state legislators that have to make the move to change it. And just a little context about where we are now, because Leobor is a conversation that's happening today. There are actually people in the Delaware General Assembly talking about changing Leobor. And so the Black Caucus, that is Delaware Legislative Black Caucus, so that's Delaware's Black legislators, essentially. There's 12 of them. They're the ones who are essentially holding the bill, specifically Senator Tizzy Lockman and Representative Kendra Johnson. Those are the sponsors of the bill that we've seen, at least knowing that they're trying to do something. We've heard that they're interested in introducing a bill to change what we just said before, but we're unclear about the details. And while we're asking them to make sure you submit it in one bill, because, one bill, we don't want two bills because it's very confusing. I don't know how many are following the minimum wage. $15 minimum wage is happening. If you look at the legislative website, there are actually 4 bills that have to do with changing the minimum wage. 4 separate bills that change different aspects of the minimum wage. Now, me as an advocate, I'm struggling to follow $15 minimum wage, and I do this for a living. I can navigate the Delaware legislative website like this and pull things up fairly easily because that's what I do. But asking someone who's not that engaged with it to follow 2 bills is so confusing, and the community doesn't want to be confused. They want to support. And so we're asking Senator Lockman and Representative Johnson, don't do 2 bills. Don't separate this out and make this confusing, and don't give it a chance for people to lose track of what's going on. You're going to have a fight with this anyway because no one wants to really change this. So let's make sure we do 1 bill. A little more context about the process that has to go through. And you guys probably know this process, so I won't go too deep into it. But anytime they have an amendment to something like Leobor or the state code, they have to introduce whatever bill they come up with into either the Senate or the House. And then it gets assigned to a committee. And it's very likely that Leobor will be assigned into a public safety committee. There's a longer name, I think, for public safety in either the House or the Senate. But if you look for the committee that has the words public safety in it, you start to see, oh, that's where they go. That's where that bill will like to go. Then, of course, it gets voted out of committee, hopefully, passed on to either the Senate or the House floor, and then it moves into the next chamber. And it goes over through that process again in terms of being voted on in committee. Just a little bit about why we want to do what we do and what we're doing. So obviously I've told you our goal, we want to change Delaware. We actually want to do it this year. We don't want to wait again. We've waited a long time. For all of you who are from Wilmington or have watched what was happening in Wilmington back in the summer of 2020, a lot of you remember broken windows, and a lot of you remember boarded up businesses, and people were upset, and people were marching. You know, some people were peaceful and some people made property damage. And so the question comes back down to, like, do we want that to happen again? You know, and that's what people are upset about, is that they had to wait that long just to get some change. And then when it happened back then, all the state legislators gave us was a task force. We do not want to wait another year for either a task force or for people to get into the mood to change Delaware. We want to see Delaware change June 30th, which is basically the end of when legislative session ends. And then we won't see our legislators back in session until January. And again, we want to make sure that our bill has those two big points in it: access to police discipline records and the establishment of effective civilian review boards. How we're kind of going about our campaign is that we want to keep media coverage of the issue going. It's very easy for issue campaigns like this to have some super important stuff that they're covering and never get covered by the media. They're doing all this hard work and it never gets covered. The other is we want to make sure that organizations are actually sending support letters. So Westminster, for example, is a faith group that sent us a letter of support saying that, hey, Black Caucus, I want to see this changed. And then, of course, regular people like ourselves have got to be at the center of this. And we want to make sure that people can see the public support of this goal. And then a little bit of how to get involved, which is sort of the one I always say, like, if you're really passionate, you care about this issue, our teams, we meet, we're meeting, I want to say the 17th, it's a Monday. We're meeting again, and I'll share this for anyone who wants to get the updates for this. I'll share the link that's in this chat, in this slide. Basically, we're split up where we have lots of things that we want people to do in order to get involved. We have a volunteer recruitment team whose entire focus is to get more people into the meetings. So that's a very important one. Obviously, you can't have any teams if you don't have volunteers. Grassroots advocacy teams, we kind of call them the community lobbyists, and the people who really just get the community involved, whether it be getting people to sign the petition, getting people to send letters, getting people to do videos, getting people to talk to their legislator. And of course, the people who are on that team also talk to legislators themselves. And of course, the most important one for those who are in it and like it, planning civil disobedience. So planning protests and rallies and things that will pretty much get the attention of our decision makers. Then we have what I call a Geek Squad or policy advisory team. They don't have to do anything except just know about the issue. What they do is they focus more on what is the policy we're fighting for, what has happened in other states, what have other cities done, what's the possibilities. And they're a great team. We tend to have lots of people who want to be on the policy advisory team. And then our communications and social media team is also super important, because this is the team that gets the word out, and it's really looking at marketing and how we're having conversations about this issue. So you don't have to be a social media buff to do this, though I've found many people are social media buff nowadays. But can you create graphics or create flyers? Can you actually just talk to people? Because a lot of word of mouth, there you go, is an important thing when it comes to this work. It's actually more important than social media graphics, more important than petitions. Like, word of mouth is probably the most important way to get the word out about these issues. And then, of course, if you're into it, if you like it, creating agendas for events, managing event logistics, those are big ones, because when we have stuff like this, sometimes we like to have what we call action days, where basically you set up a table for petitions, a table for letter writing, a table where people can make phone calls, and people just come out and they contact their legislator about an issue. But that obviously requires a whole lot of managing like event logistics. So people who are interested in that are part of sort of what we call the comms team. So I appreciate, this is pretty much it. I'll be honest with you, I like to keep it short because I want to have a bit of a conversation about where people's questions are and what people want to know. And I'll put this in the chat, this link, so that you all can get involved if you want. Even if it means you just want to get updates about what's going on and not necessarily put too much time into it. This is the thing to use. So any questions, thoughts, ideas?
Cheyenne, if you would stop sharing your screen, I think we can get the gallery view, and there you go. And then we can see everybody who's here. And that will give people an opportunity to unmute, to ask a question, to make a comment. I probably would start with the use of the phrase civil disobedience. By definition, civil disobedience means avoiding, ignoring, potentially breaking a law. But civil disobedience, I believe by definition, means peaceful, nonviolent. And so this is not about breaking windows, setting fires, rioting per se. It is about peaceful demonstration, protest. Is that fair?
More than fair. That is completely accurate. So we wouldn't go around telling y'all to do some of the things we saw during what, June or something?
June
Either
of
June or July.
2020.
June of
right.
2020. But we do want to see some of the stuff we saw in June of 2020. If you remember, the week after all of the craziness happened, there was a peaceful march. It was peaceful and it had like 3,000 people and it was huge, right? And so like, we don't want to move away from having what we know are huge demonstrations like that. But we definitely are encouraging nonviolence, and we're encouraging people to be disruptive, of course, because I'm gonna tell you, if your rally is not disruptive, I don't know what it is, but it might not be a rally. But yeah, definitely peaceful. So just clarifying that is helpful. Thank you, Sue.
Sure.
Say that word disturbed me a lot when I heard it in your presentation, the disobedience, civil disobedience. So somehow that word stuck with, I'm interested that Sue brought it out right away.
Led the crowd.
And the march you're referring to, that was a legal march. There was nothing disobedient about it. I mean, I've always thought of civil disobedience like the sitting at the lunch counter in a segregated store. You were violating the law, but you were doing it peacefully. But it seems to me that most of the marches that I'm aware of are all legal and don't violate the law. So there's either peacefully or otherwise. But
yeah, you're right. So one of the
The
things
prop-
I stand by the idea that honestly, I don't think any type of protest should get permits. I think that defeats the purpose of a protest. But I'm also very weird and probably kind of crazy. But I've never understood in terms of nonprofits, legally, they kind of have to, but like if regular people are planning a protest, to go and plan, especially around police reform, to go to the police, to ask the police that if you can plan a protest against the police it's weird. So yeah, I definitely would say, I think that the most effective civil disobedience does exactly what you said, Dave. Like it looks at like what happened back in the 60s and knew that, yeah, we were breaking rules.
yeah, I mean, I was in anti-war marches, in the 1960s and early 70s, and I don't know that we had permits, and we were blocking the streets, I guess. Yeah. So I maybe that was civil disobedience. I don't know. Maybe we were violating an ordinance that we weren't supposed to be marching.
You might have been, but I would say I wouldn't get caught up in semantics for this. Frankly, I just like to have, the point made that we like to do protests. We don't just want to do petitions and letter campaigns. And frankly, petitions and letter campaigns aren't effective for the purpose of influencing legislators. They're often ignored, unfortunately, even though I don't think they should be. They're often ignored. And so if there is interest in getting involved with the campaign, and that's something you're into, things like marching or rallying or sit-ins, that's something that we can coordinate as teams. I would also say other ways that we like people getting involved are videos. We're asking people to do outreach to their legislator in creative ways. So we want people to actually do a video that says, I want to see Leah Board changed, and I want you to change it, Senator. I have actually Senator Lockman, and I have Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker. And so I put a video up and it says, I want you guys to do the right thing, change Leah Board. And so anyone who's also interested in doing a video, I have a script that you can use, or you can go straight from the heart, y'all. And really just say to your senator and your representative that you want to see change. We have a petition because even though we know that sometimes they get ignored, petitions are still good ways of people being able to participate, and it's still a good way of communicating that people care, as well as a way of letting us know that someone cares and might want to do more but not know what to do. And so we contact sometimes people with petitions, so we let them know, like, I know you just did this, if you want to do something more, just let me know, essentially. Another way you can get involved is through Facebook posts. I know that's depends on if you're on Facebook. Some people are on Twitter, some people are on Instagram. Essentially, I say Facebook because most legislators are on Facebook, and we're asking people to make posts on Facebook saying to their legislator, I want to see this thing changed. Where do you stand on it? And tag their legislator in the post so that their legislator can answer the question about where they stand on it. It's definitely one of those things that, depending on how you word it, it can be a little inflammatory. So I recommend to people be nice, right? Don't say weird things or mean things, but be straightforward. I want to know where your support lies on this issue. I want to know what your position is on this issue. And that's important because your friends don't know most of the time about those issues. And so you putting something on Facebook and tagging your legislators, one, people are gonna be like, yeah, I live right across the street from Jane. That's my legislator. I didn't even know that. And then they're gonna be like, oh, they didn't answer the question, or, oh, I didn't know they stood that for that. I'm so glad. A lot of people don't even know who their legislators are. And so just the simple thing of tagging a legislator on Facebook with a question like that can have a huge impact on not just the legislator and them knowing what you care about, but on your neighbors, because your neighbors are likely going to tag on and be like, oh, I'm glad to hear that you share that view.
I wanted to ask you, if I could, do you know the status? I don't, of the bills. I mean, are we in a situation where the one group is simply saying, no, we won't accept any change to the existing law? Or are we in a situation where there are discussions going on over how to change it, but we haven't reached agreement yet on how to change it? Do you know?
Yeah, I do. So general context, you should always know about Delaware General Assembly. Many of the people in Delaware General Assembly are former police officers.
Yeah.
Or they're funded by the Fraternal Order of Police, the police union. And so that colors a lot of this situation. And a lot of the most powerful people in the Delaware General Assembly have that background.
Yeah.
And so anybody who, anybody down there who knows anything is usually like very careful when it comes to policing things, because it's politically unsafe to talk about it. the other piece about where this bill is, multiple organizations have actually submitted legislation to Tizzy Lockman and Senator, not sorry, I keep saying the wrong one, Senator Tizzy Lockman and Representative Kendra Johnson. They actually have the ACLU's bill, which is the bill version that we're most supportive of because it covers both community review boards and it covers the transparency aspect around discipline records. The only thing that is stopping Senator Tizzy Lockman from putting one bill out, because y'all remember I said it had to be one bill out, changing Leah Board, is political unwillingness. That's it. There's no law or anything. There's always going to be disagreement around policy. And so that's not necessarily a question of do we agree or do we disagree, and that's what's stopping us. Black Caucus members have all at some point or another made comments saying that they want to see reform. We just saw them put out a body camera bill. And so the only thing that's stopping them on Leobor is political unwillingness. Unfortunately, where we're at is we have not seen a copy of a bill that would be introduced. So we don't know if a copy that she puts out, and I'm her constituent, so I know I've been asking. We don't know if what she puts out, if she were to put something out tomorrow, we wouldn't even know what it would look like until it hit, which is not very transparent, right? Because we're helping her work on this. We've sent her legislation.
Yeah.
And so you think if I sent you legislation, the people who sent you legislation, you would usually show them the bill before you put it out. That has not happened. It's been very, very closed door. It's been rough.
Shyanne,
Yes.
I'm really so happy to be here, and it's really great to meet you. One of my big problems, and I hear it reflected here in other people's words, we don't know. If you don't know, we really don't know. And we want to know. It's really important, whether it's a newspaper is probably the widest coverage of things we need to know. But we're trying really hard to understand each other, and we're trying to build bridges and do all these wonderful things. We probably love what you're doing, but dadgummit, I came in tonight to see what was going on, because I really want to know what's going on. If you don't know, imagine how out of it people like me are. And we want to help and we want to be there.
Well, I can tell you who to target. I can give you names.
I want the facts. I want the facts. I want to know the items, the agendas, the facts, like you do.
Yeah, and we're targeting to ask for it. I'm not gonna lie. We literally just sent a letter to Tizzy Lockman and Kendra Johnson 2 days ago. I'm pretty sure it was 2 days ago, asking for a meeting so that we could have a conversation about what's the status of the bill. Is it going to be one? The only thing that we can do right now is essentially what we're doing, which is learn about what the issue is and ask for what we know we need so that we can have those details. And then hopefully, you know, if we're able to do this, push those legislators. Right now, everything is in the hands of Black Caucus, and specifically, it's in the hands of Tizzy Lockman and Kendra Johnson. And so I'm actually in Tizzy Lockman's district. I'm pushing on her. I just put a video up and tagged her in it, saying like one bill, and I want these things in it. And you know, I'm on, of course, and like you said, I'm engaged in all this, and so I'm also on the groups that are sending her letters saying, you know, can we meet? Do you have time to meet to talk about this? Like I said, the holdup at this point is really them just being very, very shady about it.
Shyanne, how does this relate to the Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force and the action that they took? There were the 4 subcommittees, 3 of which reported out at the meeting last week, and were supportive of exactly these 2 changes to Leobor. And so isn't that yet another source of action or bill drafting or content? How does that
Yeah.
connect?
So after the riots and the protests in 2020, back in summer, Black Caucus was like, oh man, we got to do something. So they said, let's make a task force, which is usually what legislators do when they don't want to solve a problem. They say, let's go study in a task force. And our understanding was that the Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force was actually going to look at, you know, what can we do around policing? And it did. It did for like almost 9 months. We expected for the task force to work from about August until January to come up with what the recommendations were going to be that they would send to the Delaware General Assembly. Unfortunately, it didn't take, you know, January is usually when Delaware General Assembly goes back into session so they can start, you know, making laws again, and then it ends in June. It was just literally April 28th, like as in a week or two ago, that they finally finished their last session. When they got into the meeting, they didn't know how they wanted to vote on the recommendations to send to the General Assembly. And so a good portion of the meeting was spent being silent on trying to figure out what the recommendations were and how they wanted to vote on them. And then they finally voted on them and they didn't get through it. So they're not even technically finished. They still have one more subcommittee's recommendations to go through. So essentially, the task force is supposed to come up with recommendations to change that what they want to change about policing and then send it over to the Delaware General Assembly. And the Delaware General Assembly has the option of saying yes, no, maybe so, tweak, change, whatever. What ended up happening was what we asked for, which was we were told by the Black Caucus, we're not touching Leobor until we see the end of that task force. And then the task force gave recommendations to touch Leobor, the same thing that I just gave you. And now Black Caucus is still sitting on Leobor. So the 29th was like a week ago. And so I expected, you know, on the 29th, you know, either a bill was going to drop that day or this week a bill will drop. Just to clarify on how that works, when a bill drops, it's either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. It's not Monday and it's not Friday. I don't know what day is it, y'all? It's Thursday. A bill has not dropped. So I'm flipping out, of course, you know, I'm going crazy because if the task force is generally finished and has already made a recommendation on Leobor, what is the holdup? You know, and if Black Caucus said, no, wait, which they said, wait until the task force is finished, who's lying here? Somebody ain't telling the truth. And so when I hear about that task force, it's like a trigger for me because I think about delayed justice. And for delayed justice to come from the Black Caucus is just even, it's like salt in the wound, you know?
Could it be that the committee's hasn't yet come to a consensus, but they're close enough that they're still working on it? Or
no, they've come to consensus. They've already sent their recommendations to the voting members of the task force.
Oh,
yeah.
I sat in on that meeting on the 29th. There were 3 subcommittees that reported. The 4th, they ran out of time, in part because of the way the process was managed. But that being said, of the first 3 groups that reported, the voting in favor of the recommendations was either unanimous or majority in favor. And I apologize, I do not remember which was the 4th.
So the one that did not get voted on was probably the most important because it was the transparency and accountability. However, the community policing subcommittee also had a recommendation about Leobor. And that recommendation was similar again to what I've been saying this whole presentation. And that recommendation was voted on in the majority to pass. And it did. And to clarify, members of these committees, there were nonprofit leaders, a good hefty portion of cops, and a couple of legislators and a couple of state agencies, like, Delaware Department of Justice, or
and Lynn Keelhorn of Westminster and of the Peace and Justice Work Group was a member. I think it was the community policing.
Yes,
Uh,
and so the subcommittees were a lot of members of the community. However, the subcommittees did not get to vote on the finalized recommendations.
Right.
So they didn't have the power to vote.
But
And
they presented their recommendations and the task force members voted in favor. What was not clear, because in essence, the session was terminated, they were going into session with the legislature, and they indicated they would hold another meeting. But it was not at all clear if that next meeting had to occur and the fourth set of recommendations offered and voted on before any action would be taken on the already approved recommendations from the other three groups. So I think
Yep.
it was sort of limbo in the sense of what happened as a consequence. And I don't know that another meeting has been scheduled.
I believe
so
it
that,
has
to
been.
me, was the frustrating part of it, that 3 of the 4 groups reported, the recommendations were approved, but there was no clear picture of what was going to happen next. That was the problem. And as far as I know, there's still no second step that's been established.
I think a second meeting has been scheduled.
It's been scheduled. Okay, good.
I don't know the date because I'm not paying attention to it at this point. After 9 months of foolishness, and then they got into their last meeting and didn't know how they were going to vote, I said, time for me to leave. So I left that alone. And frankly, I would say to anyone who's looking at this to also not participate and to tell their legislator that to wait for this task force after the fiasco of 9 months that it's been would be abhorrent. 9 members of the task force subcommittee sent a letter to the task force actually saying that they have no confidence in the task force. So that's enough to tell you it's not worth paying that much attention to. And it's more important to go to members of Black Caucus, members of your the rest of the General Assembly, and say it's now or never, right? Like we won't forget this come election season.
Cheyenne, is it accurate to say that really from the frustrated voter arena that I'm in and a whole lot of others, really the only path we have that's meaningful, if you will, is for us, for me as an individual, to write as forceful a letter as we can create to our senator and our representative, telling those 2 individuals that we want to see something happen before the end of June. We want to see the Black Caucus and all the rest of the folks get together and get with it and pass the 2 things that you described. That's really the only thing we can do, isn't it?
And call them. That's actually another one. Notice I got a pacifier in my hand.
Okay.
Call them it's very important to write them something, and it's important to call them. I'm going to tell you right now, do it publicly. Whatever you do, make it public. We've been talking behind closed doors with these people for a very long time, asking them to make this change. The only thing that got them to change was when they got called out in that letter that I just told you about from the subcommittee members. They had no plans to finish this task force. In fact, one of the task force members had actually said they weren't going to finish it until January of 2022. And
What is
so
their advantage of not doing it?
it allows for a delay so that they don't have to worry about putting any bills forth. It
Could
pretty much allows
somebody,
them to keep going.
Cheyenne, could you or Jim speak to, and Sandy, I know you have
I
your
would
hand
say
raised, and
answer
I
Sandy's
will,
question.
I will get to you. I haven't seen it, but I understood that representatives of all of the police organizations in Delaware, of which there are, I think, 48, which stunned me, that a teeny tiny state like Delaware has 48 separate law enforcement agencies. But they wrote some sort of letter. Was it objecting to changes to Leobor? What was that? What happened? They basically object to any change.
Yes, huge objections. They do not want to see Leobor changed. That's a given. So yes, they wrote a letter.
That was a public statement that all 48 law enforcement agencies are opposed to any change to Leobor.
That was the Delaware Police Chiefs Council.
I'm sorry, Jim?
The Delaware Police Chiefs Council.
Police Chiefs Council. Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Sandy, you've had your hand up for a while.
My question is, Maryland was able to pass legislation and so strongly that they override a governor's veto. What did they do, and can we learn from that?
I cannot actually speak to what Maryland did, and if someone else can, I'm open to hearing about it. I can only tell you that they must have busted butt and really had some real strong conversations with their legislators. I will say this, one of the things that is getting in the way of not just Leobor, but the campaign as a whole is the Delaware way, quote unquote, you know, in the negative sense. One of the things that we're struggling with is that a lot of our people are afraid to simply say things out loud about where their legislators stand on an issue. And so I'm going to say, with no evidence to back this up, that that is not a problem in Maryland.
Okay.
No evidence to back this up. I'm going to say this from an organizer's point of view of what I would be doing if I was in another state and what I'm asking people to do now. And so it's really easy for our legislators to get away with things like Barbara talked about, like, and to have that secrecy around this whole situation because of the simple fact that, like, people won't come in and say the things that I've just said about Tizzy Lockman. Like, and I know you all probably know who Tizzy is and love Tizzy and think she's amazing, blah, 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 all that great stuff, right? Tizzy is not doing the right thing right now. She's not. She's just not doing the right thing. And it's harming people that are in her district, including myself. And so it's something that we're begging people to step out of that really strong Delawarean way of working, where we don't want to say when someone is doing the wrong thing, especially if they have a title like representative or senator in front of their name. And so that's why I'm urging you all to, you know, find ways to be very open and public about the way that you talk. Don't just sign a petition and leave it there. Make sure that other people know that Tizzy has it in her hands, Black Caucus has it in her hands, that Pete Schwarzkopf doesn't believe in changing Leobor. Like, let them know those things, because if you don't, it's going to be extremely difficult for us to see any change on most of the big issues we care about, not just policing, but $15 minimum wage and all the other great stuff. So that's one of the things I do think happened in Maryland.
Jim, do I understand that you wrote an op-ed in the paper today or recently?
Yes, it appeared today in Delaware Online. I'll paste it in the chat.
Many of us have access to Delaware Online or to the News Journal. And the highlight of your message?
Well, the highlight is, I mean, I support Leobor, maybe for different reasons. My work is, I'm a former Wilmington police officer, and I've been studying police behavior for the past 20 years or so. And so I'm making the connection in the op-ed about the police profession and the law enforcement approach. And that connection that they make is, it's hard to think about reform if you think that the police are law enforcement, that there's all kinds of ways to do policing that have very little to do with law enforcement. And so in order to do that, there has to be some engagement with the people, the activists, and the affected communities that are trying to make changes. So I support the police. I think the police should support Leobor reform, the Black Lives Matter movement, and all of those marching in the streets for reform, because for police reform to happen, there has to be this uniting of the police in a way that really makes communities safe, and not just by the law enforcement approach. That's the gist of it.
I'm sorry Lynn is not here, because obviously she was an integral part of the work of one of the subcommittees on the Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force, and she is one of the 9 people who signed the letter. objecting to the way the process was working and with an expectation that it would not achieve the goal that was set out to do. And one of the things that she has said in some of these public forums in the past, and I'll run the risk of misquoting her, is that the barriers to any kind of effective communication across lines between police officers or organizations and the citizens and the community members who are seeking to make progress here. And that those barriers have been difficult, if not impossible, to overcome, so that, because in reality, if you have two groups with, to some extent, diametrically opposed views, the only way to make progress is to begin some sort of dialogue that establishes some common ground to start. And I'm reminded of the battles that have occurred over the issue of abortion. Just to interject, there is common ground even there. And the common ground is, it would be good if there were fewer abortions. We all good with that? You start with some sort of common ground, and then you edge out and you move on from there. But there has to be dialogue and communication in good faith in order for that to be meaningful.
Hey,
Dave.
Sue, on the question of common ground, what are the three recommendations that were approved by these committees? And I mean, are those publicly known? And I wanted to ask Shyanne, are you opposed to those recommendations? Do you not think they go far enough, or?
No, I like them. No, they gave good recommendations. The only recommendation, so related to Leobor, the only recommendation that was not loved, or I don't even know if it counts as passed, because again, the way that they voted, they split hairs on things that didn't make sense. Like they literally would take words out of a recommendation and say, I like this part of the recommendation, but not that part, but I'm voting yes on the recommendation. Very confusing.
But what are the three things that there seems to be at least some consensus on, even now?
From the task force, not from legislators. So the task force members, which two of the legislators that sat on that task force did not vote yes on Leobor recommendations, said that they all agreed, except for those two legislators, they did not agree, that Leobor should be changed so that the public has access to discipline records, and so that public defenders have access to discipline records. They also said that they wanted to see essentially the expiration establishment of community review boards. They also said, so the recommendation said, I should say, but many people said they didn't agree with this, that they wanted to change qualified immunity. I am not an expert on qualified immunity, so I can't explain all the ins and outs of that. But it was one of the things that was in the recommendations, and it was just two Republican, I think it was Pettyjohn and someone else, I can't remember the names.
Yeah.
Pettyjohn was one who said they didn't, agree with a changing Leobor, but Representative Frank Cook did say he agreed to those points. I would be careful about what we think about what comes from the task force. Remember, the task force are like only 3 of them were legislators, and of those 3 legislators, that's only 3 out of the 62 legislators that we have across the state.
Yeah.
They do not represent what's really going on in the Delaware General Assembly. And most task force recommendations, whether it be in education or criminal justice or economics, are frankly, they collect dust on the shelf.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's happened in the education area too. But my impression was that the voting members of the task force, there was a big concern that they were going to be too conservative and too pro-police. But
it was a close vote. It was like 6-3, and 2 people abstained.
Okay, but nonetheless, this group is recommending those 3 changes, and so now the question is, will the legislators who said they want to hear from this task force are now being told by the task force,
It's
you
8
should
o'clock.
approve this, right?
Mhm.
And that seems to me to be a big point that we could make to the legislators,
We're making it.
yeah, as to why they should act.
It was their point that they made to us, as a matter of fact.
Yeah,
They told us to wait until the task force did what it
yeah.
needed to do. So yeah, we're making the point. I just said I stopped attending it because if they're not listening to the task force, why should I spend another 3 hours of my day listening to the task force, not know how they want to go about voting? So I let that go. Because I knew that it wasn't, and we all, sometimes you got to play the game to be in the game, but frankly, the legislators were not concerned about what the task force put forward. I sat in a meeting with Tizzy Lockman when she was saying the task force recommendations aren't going to make a difference as to whether or not this bill comes out. We knew that wasn't true, but we knew that, like, when she said that, what she was really saying was whatever the task force recommends, it's not going to make a difference on what she does with that bill.
But I thought she said that in the context of, I'm not going to allow the inaction by the task force prevent me from putting a bill in to get this done. Was that wrong? Am I
talking out two sides of her mouth, depending on who she's talking to? I'm just gonna be honest with you.
Oh, okay.
I've sat in enough meetings with her to hear her say different things. And so Tizzy has said that the task force means something, and then she says the task force doesn't mean anything. She'll say that we're not going to wait for the task force. She says we are. I get confused when I talk to Tizzy, especially about this issue. And so I have to be honest with you. I've heard literally everything that you just said and the opposite of what you just said. Okay. This is why I'm very frustrated.
I believe, and I really wish Lynn were here, but I believe that the 4 subcommittees were working in their designated areas. There was a use of force subcommittee. Yep. There was a transparency and accountability. There was community policing, and so each of those subcommittees came up with multiple recommendations, and those were all voted on at the task force meeting, and all of them passed either unanimously or by a majority vote. So the work that was done, the words that were said were approved. The issue that Shyanne is speaking to and the issue that I struggle with is, so what? Now what? Now what happens? The decision was made not to try to force any communication with the Black Caucus until after the task force had this meeting. That waiting for that meeting, letting the task force reports be acted upon was appropriate before pushing for basically the things that the subcommittees were asking for, because it was giving some regard to the work of the task force and saying, okay, we set this up, it's been working, we should let it report, we should let that process work. But that is the starting gun, if you will, to say, now we need to drive for action, because the action is not going to come out of the task force. It's going to come from groups like this saying, we've done this work, we've said all the words, we let the task force do its thing, but there are no teeth there and nothing is going to occur. So now we need to drive for action around the words that were approved, if that helps. But those were the 3 things. There were 4 subcommittees, 3 of them reported, the 4th one did not. And each of the 3 had multiple recommendations that they made. That gives any clear, and I'm sorry, I don't know more about it, but that's the part that I do know.
Well, that's helpful. Thanks. I mean, it just seemed to me that if Cheyenne's comfortable with the substance of the recommendations, then a point that we could make to the legislators is, you created a task force. It's now made recommendations to you. It's reached a consensus. Now is the time for you to act.
Let's go. Let's go.
You should do that. Yep. You should do that.
Yep.
And you should say that to your friends too.
Yeah.
You know, say everything to your friends about what we know is going on here. We're being, I think we're being lied to, and frankly, so.
Well, clearly there is a significant pushback on modifications necessary to achieve meaningful police reform. And honestly, it's sort of hard to imagine how any of this works if we're not able to find some way to work together, either before or after legislation is passed. But making voices heard and saying, you know, we had this issue last June. It was triggered by the George Floyd murder, but there have been plenty of actions occurring locally that have raised concerns, and this task force was created to make recommendations. They've been made, they've been approved, but we don't know what's happening now, and action needs to happen. And it is inappropriate to say, we're going to study it a little more, we're going to wait a little longer, we're going to see what happens. And then comes June 30th and the legislative session ends, and then we're in limbo for another 6 months before the next legislative session starts. And so there has to be a sense of urgency for action. We may not know what the specific text of a bill is going to be, but those 2 points that Shyanne led with in terms of the 2 changes to Leobor that are desirable and recommended need to be reinforced again and again and again. They'll figure out the text, they'll figure out the sections and the clauses and the semicolons and the paragraph numbering and all the rest of that, but we can make our voices heard to say we want those 2 changes addressed by this session of the legislature.
In one bill, say that too, in one bill.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I want
One
it
bill.
done. I want it done. I want it done.
Diane, can I ask you, when you say go public, if I screw up my courage and write a letter to my representative and my senator in support of this, and your thought was, don't stop there, go public, you know, how do I do that? What do I do as an individual voter?
So there's a couple of ways. So if you're into social media, that's the easiest way, right? You go on your Facebook, you look for the name of your legislator and you tag them in something. If you're not into social media, one of the ways that I recommend going public is actually having your letter signed by friends that are either in your district or friends that are in groups like this. Invite Tizzy Lockman to one of your groups, right? And say, and you know, if you can get more people in there, make sure you get them in there. Because you know, more people in her district is going to be more impactful for her. You want to say to her, like, I heard you got this bill. What's up? What's the holdup? Tizzy's strong. Tizzy is not weak. She can take criticism. And so one of the ways you can do it is that have others sign on to your letter. That way other people know that it's happening. If you have situations where you have the mic in a place, whether that be you're giving a presentation somewhere, or maybe you are on a Zoom call with friends and family or something, take that stand and say like, hey, I just want you to know what's going on. I want you to know the situation. It's important to be creative about it. That's the most important thing, is find ways that other people can find out. And if you know some like heavy hitters, there are heavy hitters in all of our neighborhoods and in all of our groups. It's that person who's well connected, who sits on all the boards, who goes to all the parties. Find that person and talk to them about it and ask them if they'll do the same thing with you. Write a letter, sign a letter, or make a phone call. But it needs to be public, and don't shy away from what you all just said. Like, there was a promise made and a promise broken. And the promise was broken by the people in Black Caucus. And right now we're really disappointed in Tizzy Lockman and Kendra Johnson, because they have not put that bill forth yet. And we're waiting for it.
Okay, thank you.
I want to be respectful of our time. We nominally are about an hour. We run a little past, which is not a big deal. But I want to thank Shyanne for being here. I want to thank you for your passion and your commitment. There's no question that police reform is necessary, critically important, and we all have a role to play in making it happen. And we need to step forward and do what's called for. So thank you all for being here. talk to your friends and neighbors, send out emails. I'm busy with the school board election next Tuesday. Once the
Yeah.
school board election is over, I'll be bothering everybody I know with this. So anyway, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you, Cheyenne. Thank you.
Have a
Sue.
good
Everybody.
day.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Sue.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sue.